Hello, I'm Simon from Woodturning, and I'm going to turn a nice little box using my threading jig, and I have a really nice bit of Tasmanian eucalyptus. Showing the threading jig, showing my other Hope tools, carbide tools, etc., and having a bit of fun. So we'll get this mounted up. I have my step centre in the chuck. It's just an easier way for me to operate. Make sure that's fully tight in there, and we'll just get this mounted up. So I've already mounted it once. Make sure the teeth go in nice and deep on this side. Move the rest in just below the centre line. Make sure that's running free. Now I'm just going to rough that down to begin with my 3/8 bowl gouge. I just find it a quick and easy way to rough down. We'll start with the speed fairly low and just build that up to a safe speed as fast as you can go. I like using this as a roughing gouge because all the shavings go that way rather than sort of up towards your face. And we will just turn a couple of spigots on there so we can mount each side. What I personally like to do is just use a thin parting tool and just put a small little groove on the inside, and it just helps any dovetail jaws just to grip in and hold the piece. What I need to do is just check and see if there's any cracks or defaults in the wood as determine which will be the sort of base and the top. But I'm quite happy with that. There's maybe a small defect here, so I don't want that where the thread will be, so maybe I'll choose this bit for the top and then that part for the bottom. So that's what I'm going to do. Using the thin parting tool, you can't go in one hit because it will get too hot, so you have to sort of go in 2 steps. You can't go all the way through. So as soon as I start to hear the vibration, you have to be very careful. Slow down, that's it. That's the safest way, and then you can just use a saw, any saw, just to cut the last bit. So we have our 2 pieces. Really nice timber this, as I say, Tasmanian eucalyptus burr. Quite dry, so it turns very nicely. So when I make boxes, threaded boxes, what I like to do is actually do the lid first. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just eye this up. And get my proportions right. I'm going to make this smaller. I'm going to do a sort of shaped bottom with a smaller top, so I just need to look at the proportions. Okay, just a little bit more down. I find that if you just take a bit of time to sort of look at the proportions in the shapes first, it just helps you when you actually turn the final shapes to sort of for the whole thing to look correct. So that looks sort of proportionally correct, and then when we do our shapes within those pieces, then it all tends to come together. Now I'm just going to clean the bottom Rest is a little bit too high. Just make a nice clean cut across there. If you have trouble making this cut, what I do is actually get the bevel rubbing, come off the end and then go back in again. And that's a nice way to get the correct angle. Okay, this is where we're going to make the thread. You have to make sure that's nice and parallel. And we need to use the thin parting tool to make an undercut. What I like to do is just put a little chamfer on here at the back, and that's ready now for cutting the thread. And I'm going to use some thin super glue. And I like to just harden the surface of the wood before we actually start cutting threads. It just means with the threading jig we can use different timbers to cut threads into the wood. We don't have to have blackwood or cocobolo. With just a little bit of glue we can cut threads in just about any timber. Just a little bit more on there needed, that's it. So we leave that in the chuck and take that off. We put our cutter on. Just mount up our threading jig. Okay, so I have the standard 16 TPI in here. And what we need to do is just make sure you have a gap here. This dial makes this go back and forth. We'll just make sure we have a small gap here, and we'll just line up the cutter. Okay, now you need to make sure the chuck's parallel, and the easiest way is just to use a small steel rule, and you can look down and see exactly if you're parallel or not. Yeah, spot on. So it's not that difficult to do. The reason we have these gaps here is that we can bring the cutter out of the way. I'm just going to remove this so I don't hit my elbow. And then we can look down to make sure that we're parallel. Okay, that looks fairly good. So we're going to run the cutter at a fast speed, normally about 2,500, 3,000 RPM. So the cutter runs very fast. And we need to get what I call a kiss test and offer up the wood until it just touches the outside. At the moment it's not touching. So I'm going to do one click at a time. Up, there we go. It's just touching, so that's like 0. For 16 TPI we need 5 clicks. What I like to do is to do 4 clicks first. So we release this, 4 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we can make our cut. Always support with the left hand underneath here. We'll cut our thread into the groove, and then we can come out the way. And what I like to do is just add just a drop more glue. Yep, so we've cut most of the cuts, so we just harden it up with a little bit of thin before we do the final finishing cut. So you're allowing the glue to actually soak in and harden the wood before you take the final small cut. That way you're ensuring no chip out and a nice strong thread. I'll just activate that off. Excellent. Just a cloth. You've got to be a bit careful not to put too much activator because it can go white. So just a small amount needed. The hinge plate just drops back down into place, exactly the same position. We can just do one more click to do our finishing cut. Okay, just bring that out the way. So that is our thread, really nicely cut in just this little bit of eucalyptus. So I'm very happy with that. Just pop that up there. Oh. Okay. So we're going to make the next part. Get that mounted up. I always like to go from one chuck point to another because inside is a spiral, and if you move just from one area you can get some play. So I like to go from one position to the next position to make sure it's nice and tight. I'm going to clean the face. Now the next bit's quite important to get the sizing correctly. I like to use some digital verniers. Now what I do is take that over, just so it's on the tips, and I press 0. Okay. Now there is an offset involved to make sure that the two threads meet. If I turn a hole which is that size, obviously that's just going to fall in and out. So you have to make this smaller to cut the thread, and the offset is 1.2 millimeter. So if we 0 this and we just go smaller, minus 1.2 millimeter, 1.21, that's close enough. And then we're going to mark this on the timber. Now you've got to be very careful when you're using this that both points don't touch the wood, otherwise that can sort of flick up. Obviously make sure you've got your safety glasses on, so you just very lightly touch the wood with the left until it meets up with the right hand one. For example, if I come right to the edge here, I can see the mark is way over on the other side and they don't meet up, so I know that I have to just move that in. Move it in, until you can see that it meets up with the other sides. Hopefully you could see how that worked. So what I'm going to do now is just maybe do a little bit of shaping on here. I can see obviously where the hole is going to go into, so that's my guideline for a little bit of shaping. And the reason I'm doing this now, I'm not doing the final shaping, I'm just getting some idea, because we need to know how deep to go in the bottom. So we need some idea of the shape and where it's going to finish. So it's all sort of starting to come together. There's a little flat spot just on there which I'm going to take out. Just do a little bit more final shaping. just double check that. Yeah, we've just got that flat out and the rest will stand up quite nicely. So I'm happy with that initially. I can see how deep to go on the bottom because it's all sort of worked out. And then once we've cut the thread, we'll actually screw that in and we can use that to actually turn the top. And that's how we turn the top to a finial or whatever. So to start hollowing, I like to pre-drill the hole first. I just find that so much easier and quicker. You could use a drill bit in the tailstock, but I just use a spindle gouge. I'll show you how that's done, just to drill or force the centre hole out. So this is a 3/8 Hope Cryo spindle gouge. What we need to do is have the rest, so it's just slightly below the centre line. Just turn the speed down to about 1500 RPM. Not too fast, not too slow. You need to reach up slightly towards the centre. It's a swept back grind, and I'm going to tip that over at 45. We're going to start to cone out the centre, and then all of a sudden it will start to drill the centre out. Sometimes it wobbles a little bit, but we can use that as a drill to take out the centre. So as we're doing that, I'd like to put that on there and see how deep we're going to go down, which is to about there. I'll put my thumb on there. That's how deep that we want to go. You have to keep clearing the waste. Be careful because that can get quite hot. Just a little bit more. Yeah, and we've reached now the right depth. So I'm going to use the 8mm carbide tool to get rid of most of the timber in there. I might finish it with my new box scraper, negative rake, makes it easier to get a nice round bottom on there. But this is a very quick and easy tool just for boxes for taking out the material. So we'll make sure we're at the right height, just a little bit higher. And what this tool likes is a faster speed. It just likes cutting at a faster speed. So I'm just going to up the speed to about 2000, maybe 2200, something like that. It's a square bar so you can keep it flat on the rest. Presents the tool at the nice cutting angle. So all I have to do is just sweep. I can speed up a little, but you can see it's much easier if you take out that centre hole to begin with. What I like to do is just go down and get the centre out to begin with, the actual centre core. And you can feel when you've actually reached the bottom because we've already pre-drilled the hole. Now we're coming up to our sizing, so we've got to be careful not to cut too much there. And what we need is a nice parallel edge on there. So I'm just going to swap over and put the square box scraper on. You could also use the Hope detail tool or perhaps a skew, but I just find that nice and easy because it's flat and square. I'm cutting on the centre height, so we just raise that up. We can just prep. Yeah, I can see that I'm cutting parallel. Gives a really nice finish. I like to just put a small chamfer on there also. And we'll just double check that we're at our size. Yeah, that's good. So we need to just apply some super glue to that. So you have to make sure all the dust has gone because I've done it before. You put super glue on here and as you turn it, a big heap of dust falls on, so you have to just make sure that's nice and clean. And we'll just apply some thin, again so it all soaks in, like so. You'll notice that I haven't actually done my finishing sanding and stuff on here, so that's why I do that afterwards, because if I get some spill of super glue, I can take care of that. So we'll just take that off. Ooh, chucky. Cutter. Threading jig. I didn't activate that, so I'll just make sure that that's... So you don't need a lot, just a very small amount. Excellent, so we can just line that up on the inside, swing this round. Sometimes when you line it up you get the keyway in the way. Just make sure that's turned out the way and you've actually got the solid chuck. Get that in on the inside. And you can see quite well actually if it's parallel or not just by using the chuck. But if you do have difficulty, just use a steel rule or something flat and you can look down and you can see a lot more accurately whether that's parallel. So it just needs just a little bit more. A little bit more. Don't normally have this difficulty. There we go. A little bit at a time. So we need to bring the cutter out, and then we need to start cutting where it's not actually touching the wood, and we do the kiss test again. So as to get that running fast. Oh, it's just touching. Just move that back one. So here's not touching, one click. I can just hear that it's touching, so that's my 0 mark. So again, we do 4 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we make our cuts. Again, always supporting with the left hand. Just make sure we cut this deep enough for the thread to go in. Now what I have got is a depth stop on here. So if you're going to a specific depth, you can use the depth stop on here. This is brass tipped in here so it won't damage the thread and it'll always go back to that position. So I'm just going to use the hinge plate to move that out of the way and then just start to see how our thread is looking. Yep, it's just starting to go on, but I've only done 4 clicks. Remember, I need to do 5 clicks to go for the 16 TPI, so that's looking about correct. Again, I'm just going to use the glue just to add, excuse me. Oh, just to carefully add a little bit of that in. I'm trying to do this left-handed. That's it, great. When you use the tissue, just be careful you don't keep it on there for too long because it can actually stick to it, which isn't a problem. It will come off, of course, when you cut the next thread, but yeah, just be wary of that. Okay, all the way back. Because we're using the hinge plate, it will drop back down into position. We can release this, do 1 more click, and that should be the correct thread. If it's not the correct thread, there's ways to adjust, which I'll talk about. All I need to do is just wind that in. Yep, we come to our stop. As I come out, I put a little bit of back pressure. Okay. There we go. So that's perfect thread. Now it makes that little bit of noise, and I just use a little bit of wax. Any sort of beeswax, finishing wax, anything like that really. But it just needs a little bit of wax on the threads, and then you can see the difference. Yep. Now what I say when you're making wooden threads, you should always sort of spin, okay? If you have to do this to get it on, then it's too tight and the wood will move and it's no good. So if you needed to take a little bit more off of that, what I would do is just use a little bit of abrasive. Doesn't need it, I'll just talk about it very, very quickly. If it was too tight, I'd use a bit of abrasive on here, turn and sand the tops, two times maybe, back down into position, one more click, and you do the cut again. Yeah, so you've made it bigger. If it's still too tight, a little bit more sandpaper, one more click, and then you can get the perfect fit that way. So that's done, really pleased with that. Just unwind this, take the cutter off. Okay, so now what we can do is use that as a drive to actually finish the top. Okay. I'm just going to quickly swap this round because it's a really nice bit of wood. It's very rare, you can't really get it much anymore. I'd like to do a good job of this. And I'd like just a little curve on that edge. So what I'm going to do is just use my detail tool. Hope detail tool in a quick release handle. Really handy bit of kit. I'm just going to use a diamond file. This is the 180 grit. Just force a burr on here. Get a nice cutting edge. And I'm just going to shape, just want to put a bit of curve in here. There we go. Should have done that before. That's looking good. Because I'm shear cutting, get a really nice finish straight from the tool. So let's make sure this goes back in the same position. I can see the indents where the chuck fits. That's great, okay. So now we can use that as a drive to actually finish the top. Great, so speed, still running around about sort of 2,800, something like that. We've got to be a little bit more careful now, so just nice and steady. We always listen out for any vibration. If you're cutting and you can hear vibration, then you're taking too big a cut and you need to ease off. Okay, just having a look. May just have to go to a smaller spindle gouge in a moment. Yep, so I'm going to swap over back to the 3/8 spindle gouge, and we can just do a little bit more detail in here. Just make that shape just a little bit better. Just roll over the top, nice and gently. Keep the bevel rubbing, that's good. Engage the bevel, just make a small undercut on here. Now, if I sand and I take the detail edge away, I might come back and just use a skew just to tidy that up. But let's just have a quick look at that. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. We have enough there to actually undo the top, so that's looking good. So that just needs sanding up. So I'm going to use the Pro Sander. We're going to start at 180 grit. We're just very, very quickly going to go through the grits and get that sanded up. A little bit of both of using the Pro Sander, maybe a bit of hand sanding for this part. Just going to take that sharp edge away on here. .240 grit. Again, I'm just going to roll this over just to get that nice and sanded. And as I get down to sort of 240, I'll just hand sand the small detail. So this is 320 grit, this is 400 grit, and what I like to do is go down to about 600 grit. That's the grit that I normally go down to. Again, we're just going to hand sand these little details on here. We're going to finish up on 600 grit. Now, if I sand this detail away on here, what I would actually do is just use the edge of a skew or my detail tool. So if I wanted a sharper point, I'd use the skew on the other end of my parting tool. You can use any skew, of course, but nice just to get some nice crisp detail under there, nice and sharp. And then just a very, very quick lick with 600. Yep, so that's sanded up perfectly. Very happy with that. So that's the lid practically done. We'll put some nice lemon oil on that when we're finished. We obviously have to finish the box, so I'm just going to sand the outside now, make sure that that's sort of finished. Yeah, there's maybe a slight bump here and a bit of bevel rub on here, but the Pro Sander is very quick, and that would just take that away. I wouldn't necessarily spend too long machining and take the shape away. I think the Pro Sander is very quick, and that would deal with all of those small issues. So with the Pro Sander, I like to have the speed around about 2000, maybe 2500, and because it makes that spin. But you've got to be careful not to overheat, so I do short, positive bursts, keeping off the heat and just watching you don't overheat the pad. Now generally I stop after the first grit, to make sure that I'm happy and I've got all the big marks out. Once I'm happy and all the big marks are out, I just go through the grits, but I do stop after the first one. So that's 180, 240. Now I may have to sand a bit more on the bottom here when I turn it around. Okay, 600 grit. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. Yeah, it's looking really good. I absolutely love this timber. So we're going to finish the inside, and we're going to sort of slight undercut and get a nice finish on the inside. So we're just going to use the 8mm carbide tool again, which is hiding under there. Rest is just a little bit too low, so let's just raise that up a bit. Okay, the 8mm carbide works great, and with practice you can get a nice clean finish on the insides, but more often than not, especially on this side, it can be a little bit ridgy because it's all down to how you can control that. On the end grain, it tends to work really well, but on the side grain I have a bit more issue, and that's where I might use the carbide, the negative rake box scraper, the round one, just to tidy all those little bumps up. So I'm just going to take a little bit more out on the depth there. Yeah, all the inside's pretty much done, taken care of. If I needed, I can feel it, but if I needed to, I could use some calipers just to measure the thickness on that. It's maybe just a little bit of a lump on the bottom there. But I just now want to show you the negative rake round box scraper, just to show you how and when I might use that. This is a round one, it's got a 25mm negative rake. It's M2 cryo, and it uses a cutting burr, so I can just about feel the burr on there. You make sure you're cutting on the centre height, so we need to just raise the rest up. Make sure you're cutting on the centre, and again it likes a sort of faster speed, around about the sort of 2000 mark. So we just turn that down just a tad, 2400. Yeah. So what I like about these tools is they're actually very easy and safe to use. They're not going to bite and grab like an ordinary scraper. Yeah, because of the round cutter, you can get a really nice, easy, smooth finish. So I wouldn't use the tool to take timber away. I'm just using it to finish, final shaping. I wouldn't do the whole inside with this. It's just really for finishing, final shaping. So we've got a little dimple in the bottom. Yeah, it feels quite nice. You can feel where it goes to the bottom. Cuts that little dimple out. If you get the burr correct, you can see we are actually getting really nice ribbons coming off. Easy, safe. Oh, that's perfect on the inside. Yeah, you can't see it, but I can feel it. It's just a really nice, perfect finish. So, really happy with that. So we need to check our depth on there and where we can part off. Yeah, we're running about here at the moment. So I'm just going to use the thin parting tool. So I'm just going to stop and just cut the last bit off. Now that's very important. If you snap that off, it'd actually tear the wood up into the grain, and you could see that. So you do actually need to cut that off. We're going to have a small cut. I'm going to quickly make a thread so that threads onto, just to show you the finishing part. So a quick cut, and I'll see you in a sec. So we're back. Hi. I've just made another threaded bit in there. Didn't take too long. It's easy, have the threading jig. So this is another part where you can just mount the bottom on, like so, and we can easily turn and finish the bottom. So we are actually on the threads. We've got to just be a little bit careful. So just nice, gentle cuts. Just curve that round to get the shape that I require. Maybe just a little bit of a bump on here. Just pick up the cut. Keep the bevel rubbing. And take it round. We have to finish the bottom. So this is the bit you have to be really careful of. So again, get the bevel rubbing. Take it to the edge. And then forward. Slight undercut. Like so. What I like to do myself is to shear scrape. So I would just use the Hope Detail tool. I like to just finish the bottom and just shear scrape. Gives a really nice finish straight from the tool. Almost like you don't need any sanding. And I like to always put just a little bit of detail on the bottom of the box, just to show that it's been turned and finished properly, correctly. So we have sanded the top half, we just need to blend in the bottom bit. So Pro Sander. Still using the same Indasa abrasive. It lasts a very long time, it's very good. Just going to blend in. But don't go too far. So we're now going to use 240, but what we will do is just go just a little bit further. 320, a little bit further, and you're just sort of blending in the abrasives as we go up. The bottom's finished very good, straight from the tool. Just needs a quick 400, maybe 600. So now when we're doing the 600, we can go over all over the rest, because we've already sanded to 600. We're just blending in, quick on the bottom. Yeah, lovely, that's done. So what I'd like to do is just give it a quick coat of oil. Just get all the dust out. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful timber. The best bit for me is always the finishing bit. You know, all the colours jump out at you. You can see the grain pattern. Yeah, it's good. So I like to use lemon oil, especially on the sort of burry timber. It's thinner than Danish oil, so it soaks in, penetrates into the timber, and just gives a really nice sheen. It's not too glossy, not too matte. I'd normally just maybe brush it on. So just for the purpose of the demo, I'm just tipping it on the cloth here, but normally I'd have a little brush and put it on quite wet, let it sort of soak in. Yeah. Of course, it's got that nice lemon smell as well. Great for if you're doing sort of craft fairs and stuff, and you've got that sort of scent. yeah, just give your pieces a quick coat just as you set your stall up, and it smells really nice. So, just a little bit on here, a little bit into that gap, just to show you what it looks like with a coat of oil on. There we go. There we have our Tasmanian eucalyptus burr box. Thanks for watching.